Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Small Business Stories. You've got me, Dr. Loralyn Mears of Steeris, here with you live with James Brown of the Business Accelerator. And if you're thinking, my business might be a little bit stalled out, maybe I need to think about the things that I can do to move it forward faster, right? Make it more effective, more efficient, all these sorts of good things. So, James, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Loralyn.
All right, so Business Accelerator Institute, that kind of speaks, pretty clearly about what it is that you do and what you offer. But before we get into all of that, let's talk about the lay of the land, the state of the industry, if you will. What's going on out there 2026 in the world of small business?
I mean, what I'm seeing, a lot of is shrinkage of markets, because of whether it's the economy, whether it's political, which we won't even go into. But different industries are having issues for one reason or another. And so when there's a shrinking market, I see a lot of business owners will tend to panic or make emotional decisions in their business and try to retreat. When in reality, it's a perfect opportunity to actually seize more market share, um, and go after. I had something very similar in my business. I'm a retired lawyer, but I was a bankruptcy lawyer, and bankruptcy laws were the same. Like they just had never been changed. And in 2000, starting in 2000, they started talking about amending the bankruptcy laws, right? And never happened, never happened, never happened. Then 2005, they finally got it passed, and they had a president that signed it and all of that. And basically, it was supposed to make it extremely difficult for people to be able to file a regular Chapter 7 bankruptcy. They wanted more repayment plans. Well, that created panic in the market, and business dropped off from the time that that went into effect in October of 2005. The next year, 2006, bankruptcy filings dropped 65%.
Hmm.
And so I kind of knew that was coming. You kind of could see it on the wall. So we shifted in our marketing messages to target differently. And we actually grew that year, when there was several bankruptcy firms that went out of business. And so I think we're seeing some of that right now, but just for other factors. So it's one of the things that I see a lot of. And I think even if we have a situation where there's not shrinkage and things are going, one of the common things I see with small business owners is most small business owners haven't been trained. They don't know how to run a business and how to scale it. We're technicians at heart. I was a good lawyer. I was a good bankruptcy lawyer, and it was like, okay, I'm just going to start my own firm. But they didn't teach me in law school. They didn't teach me in undergrad how to run a successful business. So even in good times, a lot of business owners will struggle because they don't know how to scale the business, and keep it profitable along the way. And that's one of the biggest things that I see where when I come in to work with a business, we're fixing that.
Question.
Mhm.
I'm spending a lot of time looking at how folks are communicating a message, and a lot of people are making a shift. They were this, for their whatever entire lives, right? Their career, this body of work. And now they're making a transition into the space of authorship or mentorship or running a business, consulting, coaching, all these sorts of things.
Mhm.
And it's a shift. It's still anchored in what they did for the most part. Some people are making bigger leaps. But what I'm curious about, once you're an attorney, are you always an attorney? Are you always thinking about the risk?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's what a lot of people will tell me about why they like working with me is because I'll have that. They'll go to do something. An example is I had somebody, I was on a one-on-one call, a private client, and they said, I need to terminate this employee.
Hmm.
And I'm like, okay, so what's going on? Well, we have some performance issues, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, okay. Um, is there anything going on with that employee that we need to know about that we may not be able to terminate them? Like, and they're like, no, well, part of it is they're injured, they're on crutches, and I'm like,
Uh-oh.
like I'm like my ears are peeking up, and I'm like, well, did they get hurt outside of work? Was it at work? No, it was at work. And they weren't even thinking about that. I'm like, well, you can't, we got to be really careful how we do this. We need to talk to an employment lawyer because right now they could claim you're retaliating against them because of their injury. Right. And so I think it comes in very handy to think about potential liability like that.
Oh yeah, I would think it's enormously valuable. But I just have to ask the question, right? It's hard to switch into a new lane. We've been programmed, for so long to think X or do X, right? And then we make this shift and like, oh, wait a minute, right? It can mess us up. All
Yes.
right. Let's talk about acceleration because that's what you do with the business, accelerator.
Mm-hmm.
Is in your experience, have you seen that acceleration really enables and opens the door to more strengths and greater opportunities? Or does it also have that sort of dark side, double-edged sword where it can amplify existing weaknesses to the point where it may take the business out?
I think in many cases that I've dealt with, it amplifies it.
Mhm.
And I think it's just that, as a business owner, we tend to think in terms of, I want to grow, let's go, let's do marketing, let's get all these leads coming in, let's do sales. It's more money, more money, more money. But we have to see that there's a relation between that. At some point, you've got to deliver. And if we don't have the systems and everything set up and we don't have our factory in place, and the factory is how we produce what it is we're selling. But if we don't have that lined out, then you're going to start bottlenecks. Then you start getting complaints. Then you start getting potential suits against you, refund requests, all this stuff that happens because we weren't ready for that volume. I kind of think of it like looking out at the ocean. There's waves, but when you look way out at the ocean, it's pretty calm, right? And the waves kind of start, but as they start to come ashore, they get bigger and then at some point they break. And if you have um, uh, beach furniture and your towels and everything too close to it, it'll wipe it out. And so same thing kind of happens. We have this big surge in our business and you can wipe out your factory to the point where your business implodes. And one of the fixes that a lot of business owners will take is I'm just going to throw money at it. I'm going to hire all these people, right? And then what they're not realizing is that their employment cost ratio is now going way out of line. And so even though they're making more money, they personally are not. And so I've had multiple people tell me, look, I went from $1 million a year last year to 2 million this year, and I'm making less money personally. And so when we started examining, the big ratios in their financials, that's what happened. They started overhiring, and one business owner that I work with, his payroll expense was like 79% of his revenue. And I'm like, that's why. So now we got to make some tough choices. So I think that there's when we do start growing, we make emotional decisions. We throw money at things without really thinking through how the different parts of the business work together.
That's a really good segue for my next question here that I prepared. So let's talk about how several founders, right, they equate scale with success. Like, oh, I'm a this many FTEs. I'm produce this many widgets per day, or whatever else it is, whatever the metrics are. What are the blind spots that you often see when these leaders like those, right, that follow these metrics of scale with success, that they chase growth before they've stabilized the fundamentals that you're talking about, like hiring, ratio to revenues and all of the rest of that?
Um, I think one of the biggest blind spots is we tend to hire people to run the business instead of systems.
Mhm.
right? They forget about the systems. They don't think about that. I just need to hire more people, and that's in and of itself, that's not a good situation to be in. Um, the difference between the two is I always try to point out like McDonald's. McDonald's is like the quintessential systems. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie The Founder with
Yes.
Michael Keaton, and there's that scene where they're drawing it out in the tennis court, and he had all of his employees, and they were bumping into each other, and they would erase it and draw it again, and they were building the systems that they needed to be so efficient. And a lot of business owners, that's a blind spot. And so we just throw more people at it. But what they don't realize is that part of the reason that they're throwing more people at it is they're hearing from their staff that we're overworked, we're overwhelmed, we can't, but we're overwhelmed and we're overworked because we don't have systems,
Right.
right? And so that's where, it's like so focused on growth, growth, growth that we forget about those things until it gets to like a critical breaking point.
We talk a lot in society about business that is going up, right? We see it, oh, it's rising at some level, meteoric rise, right? Or something like
Mm-hmm.
this, or it's bottoming out, right? It's just chasing that downward spiral and just whatever pace that it's going down. But we really don't talk a lot about how businesses plateau. And when they do, why is that plateau happening? Is it a market problem or is it a leadership evolution problem that they didn't shift, right, to adjust with what's happening internally so they can balance inner growth with outer growth opportunities? What do you see, James?
I think for the most part, and since 2018, I've worked with over 450 business owners, ranging from startups to $50 million businesses. And the ones that are stalling, um, I think one reason is complacency.
Hmm.
And okay, my marketing and my sales are working great, and so I don't spend much time on that. But then it starts to stagnate, as one that'll be for your bigger businesses. They start to get complacent. And I've even had exercises where I've sat down $50 million business owners with a group of $1 million business owners, and the $50 million business owner learned way more at that meeting than the $1 million business owner, because they just forgot of the basics. And that's one of the things I'll tell them is let's go back to the basics. Another reason that I'll see stagnation in like the smaller businesses, the $1 million businesses, the $500,000 businesses, is they're failing to market their firm or their business in the right way. So a lot of it, when we start a new business, a lot of our initial business is going to come from referrals, and if we have a big circle of influence, that's going to get us so far. But then you're going to start to stall. And, you can go out and you can try to gather new referral sources and all this. But for me, at some point, I mean, I don't want to rely on somebody else to bring business in for me. So a great example of this was a lot of estate planning law firms, they get referrals from financial planners. And I had a couple that's where all their leads came from. And then COVID happens, right? And as soon as COVID happened, what happened to the stock market? It took a dump, and these financial planners are scrambling to try to save portfolios. The last thing on their mind is referring somebody for an estate plan. And so these businesses that were solely reliant on that dropped like 40%. So I always want to control that. So when you're getting referrals only, you tend to stagnate. And I'll see that around 500,000 a year. Then we have to start figuring out how do we market to the general public. And most business owners don't really know how to do that. It's like they'll hear, somebody will approach them and say, "Hey, do you want to do some LinkedIn ads?" "Oh, okay, how much is it going to be?" "Yeah, let's try that." So they're basically throwing darts in the dark, hoping that something will work. But when you can have a very intentional approach, when you understand who your A+ client avatar is, and more importantly, where they get their information from
Mhm.
and what keeps them up at night, now you literally have just tilted the odds in your favor that your marketing will work like gangbusters. When I figured this out, I was averaging at the time around 3 clients a week. And then I started asking my clients, like, what brought you in? Why is that important to you? And I started hearing these real reasons that they're stressing over this. And
Mhm.
so I changed my marketing message. In the first week that I ran that marketing message, we signed 68 new clients.
Jeez, that's
And
crazy.
and then it went to 72, and then it was 63, and my factory was non-existent, right? And I almost imploded it. Um, but I think most business owners don't really know how to dominate their market. So that's another reason where we'll see stagnation.
Oh, yeah. And now you speak of hustle. So I'm curious, right? At what point have you seen where hustle becomes the bottleneck, right? Instead of the engine? Like you just talked about, oh, okay, your factory, quote unquote, wasn't ready, right? Hey, we make the widgets here, we do the bankruptcy filings, we do the whatever, and the factory isn't set up. We don't have the automation, all of the rest of this stuff. What is that tipping point? Is there a general trend or early indicator that you see with your
That,
clients?
that's a really great question, and this is you know it's not just lawyers. It's really anybody who sells professional services, doctors, dentists, physical therapists, just anybody. But when you first start out and you're in this 0 to 250,000 a year, that's what we call the hustle market sell. Hustle market sell. You're a true solo and you're doing everything, right? Then between 250 and 500,000, that starts to become a problem, right? You start having more work to do. And so now you're, as the owner, you're doing what we call production. You're producing the work, and then the marketing and sales starts to fall off, right? So it's at that point, usually between 250 and 500,000, that we need to start hiring people, and then once we're over 500,000 to 750, now we have maybe a couple people working for us. That's when we start working on systems, right? When we have systems in place, and here's the biggest thing about this is, as the business owner and I'm wearing all the hats, I'm starting to fire myself and take those hats off. The lowest and worst use of a business owner's time will always be doing the production and doing admin. The highest and best use of their time is marketing and sales, right? Bring that in, have the vision, bring it in. That doesn't mean that they're going to be personally doing marketing and sales all the time, but they're going to oversee it, and so it's usually in that 500,000 to 750,000 is really where, if they can't get out of their own way by not getting themselves out of production and not hiring the people, they haven't connected the dots yet that they can make more money if they actually hire people. They're looking at employees as an expense instead of an investment, right? When I hire somebody, I expect a 4 to 5x return on that person.
Sure.
And so I can determine how much work do I need them to do in order to produce this much revenue. And if I'm paying them 100,000 a year and they can produce enough work that's 500,000 a year, then why wouldn't I do that all day? But when we first start hiring, we're looking at it as an expense, and we're not connecting the dots that there would be a return on investment there.
If you had to give founders advice because they want to build something that lasts, forget about 20 years, right?
Mhm.
Everything, let's call it the 5 to 10. Just get through 5 to 10 years. What would you tell them? Where should they focus their attention?
I think the first thing I would do is, and this is the first question I ask everybody when I start working with them is tell me what's the lifestyle you want to live.
Mm,
Most of the time, founders are building businesses that they end up having to serve the business.
right.
So they constantly have to be there. They can't take time off. Nothing works unless they're involved in it, right? Well, that's just a job and it turns into an 80, 90 hour a week job. But what does that lifestyle look like? Why did you start this business? For me, I had when I started my business, I had a 5 year old, a 2 year old, and a 1 year old. And I told my wife, I said, I will not work past 4:30. It's not going to happen. And so I built a business around that because I was not going to miss any of their sports activities, any of their school activities. And so even as we grew to an $8 million a year business, I still didn't work past 4:30. And you know what? I didn't require any of my lawyers to work past 4:30, which was just like foreign to them,
It,
because they're used to having requirements of 60 plus hours a week. And so to me, I built a business that served me instead of the other way around. And so that's where I first like start thinking about what it is you want from this business. For me, it was the time freedom, right? The money's great, but for me to be able to step away. My son, when he was 12, he made a ice hockey team. It was a USA hockey team out of Minnesota, and they traveled to Norway to play for 3 weeks. And I was able just to drop things and go, and the business didn't miss a beat. We're also heavily involved in volunteer work with the American Red Cross. And so we do local stuff. My daughter, myself, my wife, every Friday we work locally to go out to fires that are happening and we canteen the firemen and we get the family, we put them in a hotel and give them funds for food and clothing. But then they also respond to national disasters. And the way they do that, it's almost like a military deployment. They'll call you and say, hey, this hurricane's about to hit in Florida. Can you go? Yes, I can. Well, you have to leave in 24 hours. And so we literally had a go bag. And when we would go, we would be gone for 35, 40 days at a time with very little contact. And so, again, my business and the systems and everything were built where I could do that and nothing changed. And to me, that was about having a business that served me. And so when I first start talking to a lot, you can have people who are in that startup mode. And what should they be thinking about in 5 or 10 years is what do you want that business to be for you? Do you really want it dependent on you, or do you want something that is going to allow you to step away and do the things that you really want to do? And I think that's something that a lot of people don't really take a look at.
and it's wonderful that you've been able to figure that out. So, like you said, the built a business that serves you, but because it serves you so effectively, it enables you to serve others. And I think that's
Yes.
a beautiful story, James. That's a wonderful arc there. And as we're getting to the end of our show, how can people find you? Where can they look? Where can they learn more?
Yes, that's a really great question. So we built out a welcome page, a landing page just for your listeners. So they can go to businessaccelerator.institute and then /SBS.
For small
And
business stories, right? So let's say that
yes,
again to make sure people get it, because some people are in their cars.
yep, it's businessaccelerator.institute /SBS. And
Excellent.
so on there, there's a button they can click and they can set up a free 30-minute discovery call with me. And usually people will walk away from that with a lot of like light bulb moments that they can immediately take and implement in their business.
Perfect. That's exactly what we all need right now as business owners and just people in the world. We need enlightenment. Now, James, before we let you go, signature question of the show. If we got to peek in that closet of yours in St. Louis and we were looking at your footwear, is there a pair of shoes, boots, something that personifies who you are and tell us what we're looking at and why those are so James Brown.
Yeah, I think that has changed over the years. You know, um, I used to when we say I'm from St. Louis, I wasn't born here. I was born in Camp Pendleton in California. My dad was in Vietnam when I was born, so I didn't see him till I was 2 years old. And then we moved back to Missouri. And so I've always grown up in the St. Louis area, and it's more of an urban setting. And so, it was to me, I played sports. And so it was about, sporting outfits and things like that. And then as I became a lawyer, it was, the suit and tie and shirts, and the kind of the nicer stuff. But now I moved away. I'm about 20 miles, 25 miles outside of St. Louis in horse country. Um, and I can work from anywhere as long as I have internet. So, I'm out here, I've got a 40-acre behind us with horses. And so I would say if you look in my closet right now, it's cowboy boots. And that more fits my personality, because I am really I don't have an ego in anything. I'm down home. I'm a blue collar type person, but I want to help other people, and I think my when I think of my cowboy boots, I think of putting them on and going to work.
There you go. Spoken like the person I expected you to be, right? Just based on everything we've just talked about. It's this, it's that next, right? It's that lawyer's brain where it is black and white, right? There is no gray. It's this or that. This is what we need to do. James Brown, founder of the Business Accelerator Institute. Thank you so much for being on our show.
Thank you, Laura Lynn, for having me today.